This podcast does not provide medical nor legal advice. Please listen to the complete disclosure at the end of the recording.
Hello, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the podcast where we talk about serious illness, dying, death, and bereavement. I'm Marianne Matzo, a nurse practitioner, and I use my experience from working as a nurse for 45 years to help answer your questions about what happens at the end of life.
And I'm Charlie Navarrete, an actor in New York City, and here to offer an every-person viewpoint to our podcast. We are both here because we believe that the more you know, the better prepared you are to make difficult decisions.
So, welcome to this week's show. Please relax, get yourself something to drink. Now, no alcohol because you're our designated driver.
Aww.
And some cake. And thank you for spending the next hour with Charlie and me for our discussion about the risks of automobile travel. In the first half, Charlie presents our recipe of the week and a story about a delayed burial. A very delayed burial. In the second half, we talk about the dangers of driving a car and ways to make sure you make it home from running those errands. And in the third half, Charlie has a question about driving in the later years of life. So, Charlie, what's our recipe this week?
Bliss balls.
My, you are enthusiastic.
Yes, yes, I am. As a snack for a road trip or as a low-sugar snack for your next funeral lunch. These cacao coconut date bliss balls are melt in your mouth, smooth, creamy, nutty, sweet, and chocolatey. They taste enough like dessert to feel guilty rolling them about in your mouth. And yet they are a completely healthy and easy to make snack. Don't tell the kids they are good for them, or the people at your next funeral lunch that they are healthy. And let everyone think they are being bad. Very bad. A few years ago, I wrote about Dorothy Parker, writer for The New Yorker, great wit. I'd like to have a martini, 2 at the very most. After 3, I'm under the table. After 4, I'm under my host. And screenwriter of A Star is Born, who died in 1967. She bequeathed her estate to the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Foundation and provided that upon his death, the estate would pass to the NAACP, which to this day approves all uses of Parker's writing. She was cremated, but her remains remained for years at a crematorium, then in an attorney's file cabinet. Why? Because Parker's friend flipped out when she learned that she hadn't been left any money. Out of spite, she had all of Parker's papers, books, keepsakes, everything to be thrown out. And she also threw out Parker's wishes for a quiet cremation and organized a public memorial on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where her body was laid out in a gold caftan given to her by Gloria Vanderbilt, Anderson Cooper's mom. Then in 1973, the urn was sent to Parker's lawyer, where it sat in his file cabinet until 1988, when the NAACP, headquartered in Baltimore, buried the urn in a grassy area behind their offices. In 2006, Kevin C. Fitzpatrick, founder of the Dorothy Parker Society, learned that the NAACP was considering moving its headquarters to Washington, D.C. 14 years later, in 2020, permission was granted to return the ashes back to New York City. On August 22, 2020, when Mrs. Parker would have turned 127, her ashes went to Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx for reburial, next to her parents' graves. A tiny brass plaque attached to the top of the box, which carried the urn, reads, Dorothy R. Parker, 1893 to 1967. Excuse my dust. While Mrs. Parker's 53-year journey to burial is impressive, it pales to the 128-year journey to bury Stoneman Willie, not his real name, who finally got a proper burial and a real name. Mr. Willie, as he is known, was a legend in Reading, Pennsylvania, where his remains were on display for generations. In October of 2023, Reading revealed his real name and gave him a proper send-off to the grave. Little was known about him, other than he was picked up while drunkenly walking the streets of Reading one night in October 1895, and again days later for breaking into a boarding house. Willie appears to have lived at life's margins, but became a legend in death. Generations of school children and other visitors have paid their respects at the Theo C. Allman Incorporated Funeral Home, which has cared for Willie's remains since he died in custody shortly after his second arrest. Kyle Blankenbiller, the funeral home's director, said researchers are almost certain that Stoneman Willie was, ta-da, James Murphy, a New Yorker of Irish descent who was in Reading for a convention. Mr. Blankenbiller acknowledged that, clinically speaking, Willie is a mummy. The mystery of his identity has only added to his mythology. He has been treated as a puppet, a pauper, a pirate, a poet, a pawn and a king. Oh, wait a minute, that's the Frank Sinatra tune, That's Life. That Willie's been treated as a freak show and a roadside attraction over the years. But just in time for Halloween, there was a push to free Willie and inter him among the dead at the Forest Hills Memorial Park Cemetery. A granite tombstone was placed at his gravesite with both of his names. A large informational bronze relief detailing his story will eventually be installed. A week before he was buried, Freed Willie was the main attraction at a parade celebrating Reading's 275th anniversary. It is believed that he was in Reading for a state convention of firefighters. A known alcoholic, he was arrested twice that week for public drunkenness and for burglary. Willie gave his age as 37 and his name either as James Penn or William Penn, probably trying to pass himself off as the 17th century writer and influential Quaker. Willie died in the Berks County Prison on November 19. The official cause of death was kidney failure, but because he used a fake name, his family was never notified, and his body was released to the Allman Funeral Home. At the time, Mr. Allman, like Dr. Frankenstein, was experimenting with a new technique developed during the Civil War for preserving bodies. But the embalming formula he used, found in a German medical journal that detailed how to preserve meat, did way more than it was supposed to. Looks like it pickled Willie, since testing later revealed that the formula included high levels of formalin, cyanide, and arsenic. Oh my. The result, Mr. Blankenbiller said, is that if you touch him, he's like stone. He's hard as wood, and he's that petrified. His words, folks, not mine. Let me put it to you this way. The hearse carrying Mr. Willie's body actually overheated. Make of it what you will. Allman's funeral home had finally considered burying Willie, then the pandemic hit. With time on their hands, local historians set to work figuring out who Willie really was, going through prison and funeral home records. Mr. Blankenbiller said Willie had mentioned to his cellmate that he had a brother and a sister in Manhattan and another sibling in Brooklyn. Mr. Blankenbiller was able to find evidence that one of these relatives, Donald Murphy, was living in Manhattan at the time. Mr. Blankenbiller knew he had the right guy. James Murphy may have been from New York, but Willie has been a son of Reading for 128 years. Alexa Freeman, 32, grew up in Reading hearing stories about Willie from her parents and grandparents. It sounds silly, but it's something you can share with your parents and grandparents, and it's something they shared with their grandparents and parents, she said. It's morbid, but it was something that brought us together and gave us some sort of reference historically to who we were and what happened here then. Berks County historian George Miser IX said he first saw Willie in 1949 when he and a few of his friends from junior high school asked to see him. It was a rite of passage, he said. everyone had to go see Stoneman Willie. In the days leading up to the burial, visitors had one last chance to pay their respects to Willie as he lay in repose in the coffin at Almonds, dressed in a tuxedo that dates to the 1890s. Talk about going out in style.
Mm-hmm.
There we are.
That's interesting, isn't it?
I guess it's literally all dressed up and no place to go.
Except to the grave.
Well, there we are.
Yeah.
Except, well, there's a place to go. So please go to our webpage for this week's recipe of Bliss Balls and additional resources for this program. Your tax-deductible donations are always welcome so that we can continue to offer you quality programming. Thank you in advance for making your donation at www.everyonedies.org. That's every, the number one, dies.org. Marianne?
Thanks, Charlie. Today I'm going to talk about driving in your car. Now, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a car accident occurs every 13 minutes in the United States. While technology and new regulations are making vehicles safer, car accidents continue to be a leading cause of death in the United States. So here are a few quick car accident statistics to give you a general idea about driving and accidents. The average person will likely crash their car 3 to 4 times in a lifetime. That's a lot. Over 50% of car accidents happen within 5 miles of your home. So given that that's true, and you might say to yourself, oh, I'm just running up to the 7-Eleven, I don't need to put my seatbelt on. Just remember that half of the accidents happen within 5 miles of your home, and you need your seatbelt. If you talk on the phone while driving, you increase your chances of getting into a car accident by 400%. Car accidents are the leading cause of death in children under the age of 15 in the United States. Number one cause of death. I think that's pretty impressive. On average, one pedestrian dies from a car crash every 88 minutes in the United States. On average, there are over 6 million passenger car accidents in the U.S. every year. Road crashes are a leading cause of death, resulting in more than 43,000 people losing their lives in 2021, which was a 16-year high. California leads the nation with the highest rate of traffic fatalities. A person is killed in a collision there every 2.5 hours. Approximately 3,700 people die every day in road accidents worldwide, making a total of 1.35 million deaths globally in a year. Between 20 and 50 million people every year have non-fatal injuries resulting from car accidents. Traffic accidents and fatalities don't just affect drivers and their passengers, they also affect pedestrians and cyclists. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Association, in 2022, pedestrian fatalities increased by 2%. Cyclists fared worst with an 8% increase in traffic-related deaths. Pedestrian and cyclist accidents are increasing in frequency. Experts suggest that this is due to an increase in distracted driving. And you're going to hear that a lot throughout my talking to you, because it seems, according to the statistics, that's distracted driving that results in these accidents. A driver's age and gender also appear to affect their chances of being in a road accident, according to the World Health Organization, where injuries from road accidents are the leading cause of death in children and adults ages 5 to 29 years. So, you're seeing this difference between the United States and in other countries, in that worldwide, your leading cause of death for kids is car accidents from 5 to 29 years. In the U.S., drivers within the age range of 16 to 20 years have the highest fatal crashes involvement of 34 per 100,000 licensed drivers, despite making up for the smallest percentage of being licensed drivers. The average rate for all age groups is 12 per 100,000. So based on the available data from 2009 to 2018, men are 3 times more likely to be involved in fatal crashes than women. So younger age and being male, that's why if you look at insurance rates for drivers, it costs a lot more to insure a young man than it does to insure a young woman. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in 2018, almost 2,500 teens in the United States aged 13 to 19 were killed, and about 285,000 were treated in emergency departments for injuries suffered in motor vehicle crashes. So several factors can contribute to the driver's chance of being in a car accident. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention identifies the leading factors for car accidents among teenagers. Number 1 is inexperience. When it compared to older drivers, teens are more likely to downplay dangerous situations. They don't know how to respond. The first accident is always that probably one that you remember, and usually related to the fact that you didn't know how to get out of the spot that you were in. The second is nighttime and weekend driving. Figures from 2018 show that 52% of motor vehicle crash deaths involving teenagers took place on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Of these accidents, 37% happened between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. So my question here is, what happened to curfews that kids are out till 6 a.m. to get in car accidents? So maybe one thing to do is to bring back curfews so that, kids are home and in bed and safe rather than driving around. Additional factors include speeding, alcohol use, distracted driving, and failure to obey traffic laws. Now, something that I didn't see, but I remember when my girls started driving, was that the number of people in the car was a factor for teenagers, that anything more than one other passenger increased the likelihood of a car accident. And so, because my parenting was evidence-based as well as my clinical practice, I told them you could only have one other person in your car. And generally it was, their sister. So you can, as a parent, make rules to hopefully cut down on the number of people who are in a car. Now, there are peak times during the day when crashes are more likely to occur and likely related to changes in visibility, fatigue, and other such factors. For instance, in 2018, Saturdays were the peak day of the week for fatal crashes, while Fridays were the peak day of the week for non-fatal crashes. The period between 4 p.m. and 7:59 p.m. is the peak time of day for both fatal and non-fatal car crashes. One of the most critical factors contributing to car accidents is the behavior of the driver. Studies suggest that over 90% of traffic accidents are due to human error. Speeding is the number one cause of fatal crashes. For over 2 decades, nearly 1/3 of all vehicle accidents resulted from speeding. And I don't know if I should admit that that's probably the thing that I do, that I should probably slow down. Alcohol, drugs, or medications contribute to about 10% of fatal crashes. And you see that also in the states that have legalized medicinal marijuana, is that we need to be aware that driving high is as deadly as driving drunk, and don't do it. Just don't go out in the car if you've had your pain medicine. Failure to stay in the right lane and failure to yield the right of way accounts for 14% of fatal crashes. And I would guess that part of that is like that road rage where people are like, move over. And, they jockey for space and end up in a crash. Distracted driving behaviors such as talking on the phone or texting contributes to about 8% of fatal crashes. Distracted driving claims 8 lives per day. approximately 3,500 per year. Now, this one was one when I was younger that was an issue, and that's drowsy driving, feeling sleepy or falling asleep at the wheel. I often would feel sleepy, but I never fell asleep at the wheel. It's also a significant cause of fatal road crashes. It's estimated that 100,000 police-reported crashes and over 1,500 deaths are the result of driving drowsy each year. Now, there are several safety measures that reduce the risk of getting badly injured or killed in a motor vehicle accident. For instance, wearing a helmet when riding a motorcycle can reduce fatalities by 37% and the risk of injuries by 69%. And I'll see people on their motorcycle, short sleeves, sneakers, no helmet, and I'm always like hollering out the window, I'm not going to take care of you when you get in an accident. It's like, because you can just see how there's nothing to protect them. So that's my thing. They call in the emergency room, they call them donor cycles, because you get in a crash with one of those things and it's really hard to survive. Now, seatbelts constitute one of the most effective ways of reducing fatalities. For instance, the CDC reports that among drivers and front seat passengers, seatbelts reduce the risk of death by 45% and cut the risk of serious injury by 50%. What this shows us is that, they might be uncomfortable, but seatbelts save lives. Now, Charlie, when I was a new nurse in Detroit, I got floated to a neurological care unit. And, floating is what they do to nurses sometimes if you have enough staffing where you are, but another floor is unstaffed. So I go to this neurological unit, which, I was working cardiology, so I really didn't know a whole lot about it, but I would talk to the patients, who were, paraplegic, quadriplegic, really kind of messed up, and say, either look at their chart, what happened, he's in a car accident. And every one of them I'd say, oh, were you wearing a seatbelt? Every one of them said no. And I looked around and I said, from that, honest to God, from that day forward, I have always worn seatbelts before the buzzers, before all of it, because I looked at those people and I said, oh my God, none of them had the seatbelt on. Road accidents do not only lead to a loss of life, but also damage to property. The economic implication of road accidents in the U.S. can be as high as $800 billion a year. Now, research published in The Lancet looked at road injuries in 166 countries and estimates that the world is set to lose $1.8 trillion to road accidents between 2015 and 2030. A report by Price Waterhouse, a multinational professional services network of firms, focuses on trends that are transforming the automotive industry. One of the trends expected to impact car accidents around the world is the development of transportation that is both autonomous and shared. This development is projected to reduce the world's automobile inventory by about 25%, thereby making the roads a little safer for everybody. Car makers and regulators are well aware of these numbers and have worked to develop technology to help prevent accidents. If you've got a more recent car, those are the things that light, buzz up, or tell you you've departed your lane, that you actually get really tired of hearing. And so when we got a new car a few years ago, it was just like so annoying that, we actually read the car manual to figure out how to turn them all off. We did that, and, because we really felt like the cars were nagging at us. But then last year, I was speaking at an actuary conference, and the keynote speaker was talking about driving and death. And he said that all of these pieces of technology that we had shut off, they had been developed, and they saw the effect of adding monitoring devices had on preventing accidents. That, if you get too close to the person in front of you and the car warns you and you slow down, that it gives you more room, so it prevents an accident. Or if somebody's passing you on the left or right. On my car, the mirrors will light up if there's a car coming there, which is good, because there are changes. People's eyelids get really droopy, and what that does is it cuts down on your peripheral vision, the vision from the side. And that was happening with David. And every year he'd go to the eye doctor, and I'd say, did they say anything about your, the droopy skin on your eyes? And he's finally last year said, yeah, he said that I should probably have that removed because it's interfering with my eyesight. Because there have been so many times when he'd go to change lanes and there'd be a car there that he hadn't seen because the skin was hanging down and causing a problem. And I said, let's get that fixed, since I'm the one who's probably going to die in the car accident from this. So these lights, having that kind of surgery to remove that extra skin, those kinds of things can be very helpful. So when I got back from that conference, I turned all the things back on. So if you're one of those people who've turned them all off, a little bit of annoyance to have that extra help to see, let the cars see the backup cameras, have really prevented. People used to run over children backing out of their driveways, sometimes their own children, sometimes their own animals. And using the backup camera, you can see what's behind you. So these are all there for your safety. So maybe you'd want to turn them back on. But now there's a new danger in driving, and it's called an infotainment system that's in all the new cars. The vehicle's infotainment system is an integrated media system that delivers information and entertainment functionally to drivers and to the passengers. The infotainment system, or the screen, is the digital control panel for adjusting the cabin temperature, the audio volume, and other preferences. A study that was commissioned by the Institute of Advanced Motorists found that distraction caused by infotainment systems impaired drivers' reaction times more than alcohol and cannabis use. The research revealed that using touch control resulted in reaction times that were even worse than texting and driving. And we just got a car, Charlie, because we're going to be driving to Florida in a few weeks. And after I was researching this, I noticed how much time it takes me to find something on that screen. Because before, there was a button for the radio and there was a button for the heat and all of that. Well, now it's all on the screen. And especially if you have a new car, it's like, where the hell did they put it on that screen? I can't find it. And if you're driving and trying to, like, I accidentally turned on, this car has air-conditioned seats, which, as an aside, is really not really comfortable because it's like cold air blowing up your
ass.
Yourself.
I have never heard of that. Okay, all right.
I'd accidentally turned it on, so I had this cold air blowing, and it was like, geez, I've got to turn this off. I really nearly kill myself trying to shut this off. Well, I never really thought about the screen as being, as dangerous as it really is. So I'm here to tell all of our listeners that don't do what I did by trying to figure out your screen while you're driving. Pull over, get out your book, or just hit all the buttons and figure out what they do and where they are. before you're driving, not while you're got cold air blowing up your skirt. So anyone who takes their eyes off the road while driving runs the risk of getting into an accident. So if it's your kids being bad or the dog jumping in front of you, I mean, for both of my kids, I bought them these seat belts for the dogs. It's just, hooks on their collar, and then it hooks into the thing on the seat belt, so they can't be jumping all over. Well, of course, neither girl uses them, but their dogs are in their laps. It's like, that is not safe. Kids can really make you crazy, but that's another story. So keep your eyes on the road. Keep yourself from getting into an accident. AAA found that all it takes is a 2-second diversion, and your risk of a crash doubles. 2 seconds, and you're doubling your risk of a crash. I remember talking to one woman who was in the hospital who she had been in a car accident. I said, "What happened?" She said, "Oh, it's the dumbest thing." She said, "My Kleenex box slipped from the passenger seat onto the floor, and I bent over to pick it up. And in the process, she took her eyes off the road and was in a terrible crash." So here are some tips to help prevent car accidents so that you and your loved ones make it home alive. I mean, there's lots of things. We know everyone dies. There's lots of ways to go, but some things are in your control. And there are things like avoid distracted driving. Keep your focus on the road. Avoid using your phone. Eating. That's one for me, is sometimes eat in the car. And it's like if you drip on yourself, then you think, oh, I'll just wipe it off or whatever. In that moment, that could be the end of you. And then you would die with food all over you. I mean, that's not pretty. So don't eat engaging in other activities that can distract you from driving. In Europe, automakers will soon be required to install monitors to detect driver distraction to receive top safety scores. As far as we know, no such move is being publicly contemplated in the United States. Observe the speed limits. Speeding is a leading cause of car accidents. Always obey posted speed limits and adjust your speed according to the weather and traffic conditions. I probably don't really have to tell you that because you know it, but do you do it? And do you realize what it could mean for your survival? Drive defensively. Be aware of your surroundings and always look for potential hazards. This is really important. You should be looking in front of you, obviously, but looking in front of you to see, are there cars slowing down? Are there lights flashing up ahead? What's going on in the road in front of you, like not immediately in front of you, but also a mile or so in front of you, however far you can see. If you see a threat, slow down and be prepared to stop. When changing lanes or turning, always use your turn signals. I know, who would have thought of it? And don't tailgate because somebody stops too fast or the whole road rage or people doing crazy things. Now, if somebody is looking like they're ready to misbehave or they're messing with you, your defensive response is to slow down. Slow down. Let them get ahead of you and go off and do whatever they want. Because even if they slow down with you, they'll get bored because it's no fun if you're not engaging and you're just driving slowly. So just know that your defensive driving response should be to slow down, and it's probably going to annoy them even more. But, they'd have to slow down really far to catch you. Maintain your vehicle. Regularly check your car's tires, brakes, lights, and mirrors to ensure they're in good working condition. Also, keep your windshield clean and replace worn wiper blades. Now, that's the thing that people will forget about is when it's raining or snowing or whatever it's doing wherever you are, you need to have your wiper blades working. It's a couple bucks and you go to the AutoZone or whatever, and if you smile nice, they'll even go out and put them on for you. And I don't know, maybe you don't even have to smile nice, but replace them. Use your safety features. Many cars come equipped with advanced safety features such as forward collision warning, automatic emergency braking, blind spot warning, rear cross traffic alert, and backup cameras. These features are there to help you avoid accidents. Please use them. Drive sober. Never drive under the influence of alcohol and drugs. You might have taken your gummy or done whatever. You've got the munchies. You got nothing in the house. You just say, I'm just going to go to Cumberland Farms and I'm going to pick myself up a Snickers bar. No, you're not. Make a bag of popcorn. Do something else, but do not drive. Wear your seatbelts. Always wear your seatbelt. And make sure that your passengers do the same. When my kids were really little, I told them that the car couldn't go unless everybody had their seatbelts on. And they believed me for a really long time because, I don't know, I think we had too many people in the car or something and somebody wasn't buckled. And one of the kids said, but the car isn't going to work. And I thought, where'd you get that? And then I realized, from me. So remember that safe driving is everyone's responsibility. By following these tips, you can help prevent car accidents and keep yourself and others safe on the road, and hopefully live long. Any thoughts, Charles?
I'm glad I don't drive.
Oh, so is the rest of the world, Charlie.
Yeah, yeah. And folks, you're welcome. Living here in in New York, I have the subway, I have buses. It's great. Unfortunately, mass transportation across America is not like what it is here. And
no.
And before moving here, I still enjoy driving. Every time I go back to Michigan, I love driving. But boy, Marianne, as a pedestrian, people are nuts. I mean, drivers, I should say specifically. Yeah, to your point of just about being distracted, and a big thing here, and actually it is across America. People are going to make that light, or even if the light has already turned yellow and sometimes red, well, they're just going to go through it, and that's it.
When I first moved to Boston, I stopped at a yellow light, and I was rear-ended. And the guy got out and was hollering at me, like, why'd you stopping? And it's like, the light was yellow. He said, so? And it was like my introduction to Boston driving. It was like, okay, I guess I don't stop at yellow lights anymore.
Yeah, and that was years ago. It is. I don't know how like number of cars and traffic there, but I mean here people, it just yellow lights and red lights are for other people. And there have been times I've been walking with someone, get to a corner, and traffic's going in one direction. I look both ways, and I get ribbed sometimes. Okay, Charlie, everything is like this is one way. I said, well, for me and you it is, but people are on not only cars but bikes, mopeds, running, and yeah, everybody's not doing this in the same direction. It's really like taking your life in your own hands sometimes, just crossing the street, because people are, they're in a hurry, or it's their world, and we're in it. Hi. So there we are. Yes. In our third half, the Ethicist newsletter in the New York Times offers advice on life's trickiest situations and moral dilemmas from the philosopher Kwame Anthony Appiah. We thought we would share one that was published this year. I'm in my early 70s and I'm married to a man in his 60s. My husband's father struggled with Alzheimer's for almost a dozen years before he died. It was incredibly hard on everyone involved. And now my husband is in the midst of his own health crisis. He has had some significant cognitive decline in the past 2 years, which affects his ability to function to his satisfaction. He is constantly looking for his phone or iPad. He gets lost while driving. He sometimes asks me to help him send a text or email because he can't remember how to do it. This causes him so much shame. He says he no longer belongs in this world. His dysfunction reminds him of his father's decline, and he doesn't want to put himself or others through that pain. The neurologist is less than helpful. My husband does fairly well on 10-minute cognitive screenings, so he receives a diagnosis of mild cognitive decline instead of dementia. He has started to talk about suicide and is afraid I will stop him. He has asked me to commit to letting him choose his time of death. Frankly, I respect his choice and believe he has the right to decide for himself. He also has asked me for help in researching the best way to kill himself. I have considered trying to help him with that, but fear that I am committing or abetting a crime. What's the ethical thing to do? And yes, I understand that what's ethical and what's legal may differ. Marianne, your thoughts?
Well, I thought I'd let you go first.
Very good. Very well. First and foremost, I agree with this gentleman's choice on how he wants to end his life and on his terms. But also, remember the Mills Brothers? They had this song, "You always hurt the one you love." In this case, the lady is the one getting hurt. Technically, yeah, she would be committing or abetting a crime unless she lives in one of the very few states or the District of Columbia, which allows assistance in dying. It is selfish to put your partner into that situation, in addition to the emotional and psychological stress the giver may suffer. I just also hope that the lady also considers what she will need. That's my take. What do you got?
So here's let me say this about that.
Yes.
There is nothing in this letter that says that he actually has anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Now, early dementia, mild cognitive decline can be a result of depression, can be a result of many different things. And from what sounds like, from what this neurologist has done, is if all that's been done is a 10-minute cognitive screening, then this guy has not been worked up for dementia.
Okay.
So he's assuming, because his father had dementia and because he fears that it's dementia, he's assuming that he has Alzheimer's or some sort of debilitating dementia. But we don't know that. So if he decides to commit suicide, first off, legal aid in dying, he wouldn't meet the criteria. You have to have a diagnosis of a debilitating, life-ending disease. He doesn't have that. So, of course, you don't need that to kill yourself. But if she's going to help him, I mean, I assume that they'd want a prescription or something to do that. So this guy, if he was my husband, I'd say, well, I appreciate that you don't want to live like this, but we don't really know what's wrong with you. So let's find out what's wrong with you. And like pure cognitive testing is an 8-hour event. You go,
Okay.
8 or 9 in the morning, and you're there till 5 o'clock in the afternoon, because they run, our brains are more than, a 10-minute cognitive screening. So he hasn't had that. He hasn't had an MRI. There's just like so many things that he hasn't had. And I would guess just from reading this that he's depressed, especially if he's going right, like to the suicide. I don't want to live like this. I want to choose when I'm going to die and all of that. Well, if he gets started on an antidepressant and he feels better, he's not going to want to die. I mean, he's only in his 60s. He's got like a good 20 years ahead of him anyway. And so, if you had diabetes, you'd go to the doctor, the healthcare practitioner, and you would get treatment. And if you have depression, you go and you get treatment. You don't just ignore it or just say, well, I'm just going to kill myself without even trying to treat the disease. So I think he's really put the cart before the horse on this one. So what does the ethicist say?
Before this is why you're the brains of the outfit. I did not look at the whole picture. And I'm just laughing at myself. Yeah, of course. Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Well,
so,
I don't think you can take things just at face value. I don't think you want your practitioner or your spouse or anybody else to just say, I'm telling you this and therefore it's true. It's like, you're telling me this and you believe it's true, but what evidence do we have to say it's true?
And for me, which I'm sure many people do, I was going by, when I first read this, it's like I was going by my gut reaction, like, of course he has every right to do that. And yeah, he does. But to your point, in the bigger picture, yeah, what's the whole picture? And like you said, a little 10-minute, okay, yeah, sure, you're good, you're good. It's no good. You got to look at the complete picture. So I need to learn to step back and look at the big picture. And let that be a lesson for you folks too. That's what I want to say. Okay. Now, getting back to the Times. From the Ethicist. I'm so sorry about the situation you both find yourselves in and wish it were rarer than it is. We are, I agree, entitled to decide that losing the cognitive functions necessary for a life of autonomy deprives us of the possibility of a dignified existence. And so we're entitled, in my view, to make plans to end our lives when that happens. Unfortunately, once it does happen, we may not be able to recognize our situation or to execute our plans. Even states that, unlike yours, have medical aid in dying, statutes don't allow such aid to patients with an impaired capacity for decision-making. It can't be secured by an advance directive. How do these broad principles and circumstances apply to your case? I'm not going to pronounce on the legality of helping your husband end his life, either now, when he remains mentally competent, or at some point later when, as he fears, he will no longer be. A lawyer can tell you how your legal exposure will be affected by the details of your assistance given the laws of your state. I will say that, inasmuch as it isn't morally wrong for your husband to end his own life, it isn't wrong for you to provide the advice that he requests. But to deny that an action is wrong isn't to say it's necessarily wise, or anyway, that you should hastily pursue it. Right now, your husband, distraught, suffused with shame, anguished by the prospect of sharing his father's fate, could be prone to acting precipitously. Older men are far more likely to kill themselves than older women, and one reason may relate to gender norms. Men feel especially humiliated when they come to depend more on others. The fact remains that countless people lead lives of value while experiencing some noticeable measures of cognitive decline. They're able to give and receive love, even joy, and it's impossible to predict when deficits will cross into outright dementia, if this is what's in store. there could be extended periods of stability. Advanced care planning, prepared while your husband is legally competent, can give him at least some control over his medical future. In the meantime, I'd urge him to consider that his current impairment doesn't mean his existence offers nothing of value to him and to those who care about him.
You see, what's interesting about this is that this guy is an ethicist, so he just sort of looks at the ethical part of it, and doesn't at all even mention that it could be something else, you know?
Yep, exactly. Yes.
Which is why it takes a village, Charlie.
I agree, and I hope, and unfortunately, as much, not unfortunately, I understand that phrase completely. You and I have both worked with, with when we were working together, with kids having emotional and psychological issues, and it wasn't just one person to take care of all that. It did take several people. It took a village, and it's the same with this. So, yeah, it's the same with this. And that's it for this week's episode. Please stay tuned for the continuing saga of Everyone Dies, and thank you for listening. This is Charlie Navarrete, and from playwright Edward Albee. I take pretty good care of myself, and I have no enthusiasm whatever about dying. I think it's a terrible waste of time, and I don't want to participate in it.
If only it were a choice, huh?
Yeah.
And I'm Marianne Matzo, and we'll see you next week. Remember, every day is a gift. Cut.
This podcast does not provide medical advice. All discussion on this podcast, such as treatments, dosages, outcomes, charts, patient profiles, advice, messages, and any other discussion are for informational purposes only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Always seek the advice of your primary care practitioner or other qualified health providers with any questions that you may have regarding your health. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard from this podcast. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. Everyone Dies does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, practitioners, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned in this podcast. Reliance on any information provided in this podcast by persons appearing on this podcast at the invitation of Everyone Dies or by other members is solely at your own risk.